how did you come to Wagner? Was that love at first sight, or was it rather slow cooking in the way that Simon Rattles expressed it?
For me, it was pretty much love at first sight. I went to, from a young age, from 12, I went to a German camp to learn German, and was already singing in a boys' choir before that, where we did some German things, mostly Bach, and had nothing to do with Wagner. But when I decided to be a singer, one of the first things that I remember listening to was a Lohengrin recording with Jess Thomas singing Lohengrin, and I immediately wanted to sing that part. And in fact started working on the Glaserzählung in Lohengrin with 21, 22, which was too early, but I really had a goal immediately to want to sing that role in particular, and Wagner's music globally. The thing that got me about it is there's some this magic of the orchestration and the specificity of the text, which thankfully I already spoke the language, so I could understand what he was doing, and the fact that he was always talking about the idea of a Gesamtkunstwerk, that you were really joining theater with music, lighting, also very special effects that he had available during his time, which of course we have many more possibilities of that now, but just this idea of everything being unified into one type of art form was very intriguing to me. What I knew about him as a man or as a writer also, back then I didn't care for him very much. But that's of course because the things that are normally talked about in regard to him is his anti-Semitic tendencies, but which was a sign of the times. But he also was a revolutionary in politically. He was very involved, and it's a love-hate relationship with his personality, but somehow the music really took me right away.
Not responsible. Okay, thank you. Now talking about the Wagner roles, the Wagner parts. As I said to you before, you have sung nearly all important roles, very demanding ones. Just to mention Siegmund, Siegfried, Loge, Tannhäuser, Erik, Lohengrin. These roles demand a huge amount of stamina in several ways. Not only because there's a lot of music, but you have to really endure quite a lot on stage. And with these aspects in mind, which has been for you so far the largest challenge when you got into these Wagner roles?
I think my first challenge was convincing everyone else that I could sing the roles, because I was a lyric tenor for a very long time, singing a lot of Mozart, a lot of Baroque repertoire, singing a lot of Bach passions, and I had to prove to myself and to them that I could move into these things. The next biggest challenge was when I started moving into the heavier Helden tenor rep, the Tannhäuser and Siegfried in particular, the young Siegfried most of all. And because of the fact that there's an incredible long period one needs to prepare the role technically, and one doesn't always have that time, the way that the business works these days. So there were, in both cases, both with Tannhäuser and with the young Siegfried, I did not have as much time as I would have liked to have to prepare it. And I nearly forgot that when I did my first Siegmund, which I jumped in, was in 2012, I believe. I learned the role in 10 days and then started rehearsals. I knew a lot of the music just because I'd listened to it, but I had never really sung it.
Wow.
And then we started rehearsals, and fortunately I had a month to then properly ingest the role during the rehearsals. But that is actually the biggest struggle, is having the time to really know the role, and that in a lot of ways doesn't happen until you've been singing it for several years. The other big struggle, of course, is to make sure that the voice stays healthy, that you don't get tired vocally before the third act, is particularly with Siegfried when Brunhilde comes completely fresh from her nap. And that's almost an opera's worth of singing, just the duet with Brunhilde. So there are a lot of issues to deal with.
Okay. So far, of all the roles, you have hinted already in that direction, but so far, which role would you say has been so far the most demanding one for you?
The young Siegfried.
The young Siegfried.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it requires, for me anyway, such an extreme of being loud, of being active on stage, the hammering of the sword, he's a young, well, maybe early 20s, and he's running around all the time and is quite active and maintaining the ability to still sing while doing that. All of the text, it's a lot of text to remember, and it sits for a tenor rather high. And it's it's the longest part. Yeah, the tessitura is not as high as Lohengrin, but it just sort of sits up there and demands power.
Yeah, for a long time. Mm-hmm. Coming to that particular role, Siegfried, I saw already something very interesting, and I would like to have some more from you on that aspect. Siegfried sings and hammers a sword. Tell us a little bit about the synchronization between the hammering, you're singing, and at the same time listening to the orchestra. How do you manage that because of the overlapping of a lot of noise, so to speak?
Yeah, it's not easy. Most of all, if you want the audience to have the feeling that you're actually hammering a sword, because then it's quite loud with the hammers and the steel on the anvil. And it's written very exactly, the rhythm of the hammering, which is not always easy. A lot of times it's syncopated against what I'm singing, and it takes a lot of coordination. I'm glad that I'm used to hammering things because my father was a roofing contractor, and I worked with him in the summers. So I was used to hammering and not thinking about it. But it's a whole other thing to remember the text and the hammering, and you can't hear the orchestra when you're singing very loudly and hammering. So you have to sort of hope that it's together.
Interesting to know that, because more often than not, people do not get that because they see performances which are very professional, with excellent conductors, wonderful singers on stage, and they do not realize how tricky the whole thing could be. I mean, to keep track on that. Yeah. Thank you. Now, you mentioned your training and your learning from the very beginning. I was not aware of that, but has it been, despite the fact that you speak so fluently German, has it been a challenge for you to sing German, the German of Richard Wagner?
Yes, and especially in the later works, because his Wagner Deutsch gets more sophisticated. This use of alliteration in a different way than in other languages, with the beginning consonant sounds repeating, is. I always, when I first looked at Siegfried, I thought this is the silliest the silliest thing ever. Then I realized actually Siegfried probably was taught how to speak by Mime, and so it made sense that this Zwerg had taught him how to speak, and that it was always with this sort of poetic. It's actually, which I didn't know before I started working on it. It's sort of the extreme of romantic poetry that it had the use of the alliteration, and he definitely took it to an extreme in Siegfried, which for one is just difficult to pronounce sometimes because of the speed of the text while singing. But on the other hand, it also, once you do know it, it's easier to remember the lines that way because it's so repetitive. Where if the first word starts with a Z, then you know the rest of them are going to as well. But it's particularly challenging to just. He's a lot of times using very complex grammar. In the Valkyrie, Siegmund has phrases where it's completely twisted around grammar that Germans don't understand the first time they listen to it. So it's definitely challenging for anyone who even speaks German fluently.
That was actually what I wanted to get at, because it is a double compliment to you, because I have spoken to German-speaking singers, and they have told me how difficult it is for German-speaking people to sing those words as well. Mm-hmm. They take it for granted many a time, only to realize very quickly afterwards that this is a mistake. It's not the same German. Just because they speak German as another language doesn't necessarily mean that Wagner's German will be easily spoken. So, double compliment for you. The other question was, there have been many translations of German works, from Wagner works into English. Have you sung any Wagner role in English?
No, I haven't. And it would intrigue me to do it, but I think it would have to be a very, very good translation, because he's so exact in his use of the German language. It would be, well, I've experienced it from the other way around. All the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas that are out there, they have attempted to do German translations of those things, and it's built entirely on the humor of the English language, and it doesn't work. And I have the feeling, I listened to there's an very old recording of The Ring in English. Can't remember who conducted it now, but they did quite a good job of translating, at least to the extent that one can understand basically what's meant, but the subtle qualities are lost when you do that. I have that problem generally translating poetry or libretti, that it's very difficult to translate anything exactly.
I fully agree with you. Actually, I have heard many times that the poetry is what gets lost in the translation. There is a number of English translations of Wagner's work. Probably the best one I've seen so far come from Rudolf Sabor, who has written the whole thing, translating and comparing. But he agrees to that. It's extremely difficult to get the feeling of what is being written in German, particularly by Wagner, and translating into good English, addressing what you were saying. But at the same time, there's something related to the sound.
Yes.
Because the sound goes hand in hand with the music, and something will get lost into the translation. So, I spare you the opinion of assuming what would that be to sing that in German. In English. But when we're talking about language, there's something related to the prompters, and there's a prompter who got this possibility for me to talk to you. How important is for you the role of a good prompter?
That's very important to say, a good prompter. immensely important. In the rehearsal process is, first of all, the most important moment when you're coming into a rehearsal having maybe sung something else before, and the director is shouting at you to do this or that, and the conductor is also either learning the piece or they have their own opinions about how they're going to do the piece, and to have somebody who's keeping you on point with the text and reminding you when you make mistakes during the rehearsal process, and when that person also is then in the performance with you, if it's a good prompter, they have a sixth sense. When you maybe need help, before you know that you need help, the best prompters have that, and they will give you text even though you didn't know you needed it. It's a security for us. Unfortunately, in a lot of theaters, it's a position that's no longer being filled. There are a lot of places where there aren't any prompters anymore, and it's very difficult for the singers, especially in these pieces with the amount of the length of the operas, the amount of text, that there are always going to be moments when you can't be concentrating 100%, and to have another brain there helping you along, it's immensely important. I find it absolutely vital for Wagner operas to have a prompter.
I put the question to you because you mentioned exactly the key word to me, not only the saying that it has to be a good one, but it's the fact that these people have to anticipate, they have to have the experience, they have to have the touch, the sensibility to realize when someone could be needed, and also be not only supported, but what many people do not realize is that they do not only work in the performance itself, but they also do the whole work during rehearsals. And this is when probably most of the corrections can come. Yeah. Now let me address something which has been, at least in the Wagnerian word, a little bit of an issue, Regietheater. I just learned that something very clever, there is no theater unless you have Regisseur, which is right. But now we're talking about something different. You know what we're talking about? These extremely modern interpretations or different interpretations of the works. Wim Wagner, a person who was a pretty good dramatist himself. He wrote his libretti, you know that, but he also gave indications about mimic, movements on stage. Do you think that Regie Theater is contributing in a very significant way or not to the better understanding of the works of Wagner by the public?
For the public, I don't know if it. I think some of his ideas can be illuminated through different perspectives. That you can put a different light on the piece as well, or on the characters. The question for me becomes: we've been in a sort of state of having this Regietheater style for quite a long time now. It's in the Wagner world, it sort of got held back for a while because Bayreuth stayed relatively traditional. But since the 70s, there's been this sort of pulling in completely random, sometimes, ideas and putting them on top of pieces. And I find that when it's only that then it's not helpful and not useful. And it's a product of a period of time where society had enough funding from, the opera companies had enough funding from the government to where we could experiment with a lot of these things.
Of course.
And it was probably good to do the experiment. The best Regietheater type directors that I've worked with, they still honor what Wagner wrote. Also, when he says that the Siegmund puts his hand on his heart or whatever, they might not he might not put his hand on his heart, but he'll do something that's an equivalent within whatever their concept is. And I think that there's that fine line, and if they know their craft well, they still stay true to what Wagner was trying to say, just with a slightly different, more modern perspective or whatever else. And also, because Wagner was so careful with his choice of words can have completely different meanings depending on the way you look at the sentence.
Right.
And so there are legitimate possibilities for experimenting with, well, could he have meant this instead of what everyone expects it to mean? And that can be useful. So I would say that I'm not an absolute fan of Léger Théâtre, but I think if it's done with consequence, with careful handling of the text and the themes of the piece, that it can be interesting, and as long as it doesn't get in the way of the Gesamtkunstwerk, so if it goes against the music too much, if they want to change completely the structure of the piece, then I have my issues. Okay.
Yeah, excellent approach, because I think that there's a little bit of a misconception when people talk about Regie Theater, and probably the belief that Wagnerians, fanatic people about Richard Wagner, want to keep the old staging, from 1876 or something like that. This is not the case. Some people have nothing against something modern, but you addressed the right thing. Wagner was so specific in this course, and if we respect what he wanted, the intention, some symbols involved in the libretto, that's perfect.
I do think also I do think it's a bit dangerous for people that don't speak German. If the translation that they're reading as they're watching the opera, if it's not clear enough, that then Regie Theater can be a problem for people who are watching this not knowing what the German means necessarily. And that in those cases, I totally understand the idea that there should still be very traditional stagings out there as well. The all-important Boulez Giraud ring was, people hated it for in the beginning, and then now they're all wishing we would go back to that. And the last two ring cycles in Bayreuth have both been very much in this Regie Theater direction. Yeah. And I don't know if there's a point at which that has to end, and that things go back to the way that Wagner himself, that Wieland Wagner or Wolfgang, the way that they stage things, with the one set and some sort of a schräge, can't think of what that is in English, a pitched stage, and standing and singing. I know directors who used to be very, very physical, active directors, and they now have gone more to that style of standing and really just dealing with the complexity of the text and the psychology of the character. So I think the possibilities are there for us to experiment with going back to a different style, or expanding an old style.
Interesting point. There are works of Wagner, that actually pretty much demand not too much on stage, specifically because the work itself is so complex, not complicated, complex. Parsifal, for example, that actually you do not need distractions. You need to concentrate on what is going on in there. And this is probably very suitable option. And since we're talking about that, what is your, to conclude, those concert performances versus stage performances? I tell you why, because I've seen both. Götterdämmerung a couple of years back in Duisburg, concertant. It was sensational, okay? But I want to see your perspective, without makeup, without costume, just singing.
It's a very interesting question because I've done both. It was in the Goethe-Dämmerung and there are certainly pluses from the audience perspective of being able to see the orchestra, and you tend to hear more of the details of the orchestration. Right. To also see the singers just singing is different than if they're doing a lot, and you can because you can basically understand the story that Wagner is telling without the acting. It is difficult as a singer, even though I've done a lot. I've sung a lot of oratorio and that sort of repertoire, to do any role just standing there and singing, because you feel quite naked just standing there in your tails, and the audience is right there and the lights are up, and it's a completely different feeling. You don't have a prompter also. So you feel quite, it's a risky situation, I'll say that, but it is nice to concentrate on only singing, and which is taxing enough unto itself. To be able to then, through small gestures, text and facial acting, to bring across the same story that you would be bringing across on stage. So I think there are benefits to it, to having concert performances, but I would say most of all because then for the audience, they get the pure music, right. And they have a chance to really understand how many harps there are and where the sounds are coming from. You hear more details that way. Absolutely. In a good concert performance. Okay, but
could I say that maybe you feel maybe more comfortable playing the role with the costume on stage, yeah, with all the movement, with everything that implies, because it's also distractive, but you are living the role, you're singing it, you're just not staying there.
Right. It does help to act it. That's why also most of the times when I've done concert performances, we still try to add a little bit of staging into it, just so that we have a distraction for ourselves, and to try to display some physical part of the what's going on in the opera. The most difficult thing to do is, because that was the case with Goethe-Dämmerung, is to sing the role the first time in the concert version, but without score, and not have a staging to grab to use as a stabilizer. When I've done a role on stage many times, then I can use the physical feelings I have from the stagings to remember my text, to use the physicality when I need to, which I would maybe be hammering, and instead of hammering I was just standing there. That then I can stay more relaxed and more be physically involved, even though I don't have to hammer. You know, these kinds of things are best to have in the body, and when you're doing a role that you've never sung in a stage situation, then you have nothing to grab onto. It makes it more difficult. Yeah, I mean, that's one of our jobs as well, obviously.
Most interesting, because I think that for many people, I mean, people like me, this is not known. I mean, how important it is to be able to leave the role with the costume, moving around, having the whole stage in front of you. Corby, we're coming back to the end of our interview. Any experience that you would like to share, anecdotal or something like that?
Yes, actually, I did only one time. One production I sang Loge in Rheingold. That was in Geneva with an old master director, Dieter Dorn, and Jürgen Rose, who was also doing the costumes and set, who I believe also was involved in one of the Holländers in Bayreuth back in the 80s. He just along the idea of having a masterful director of that applied their abilities to Wagner. He came and we have a meeting at the very beginning, Konzeptionsgespräch, where they explain what the set's going to look like and what the costumes look like. And Dieter Dorn basically just started explaining the staging, and it took him about half an hour. He had staged us all in that half hour. He had said, well, and then the Riesen will come out here, and then Loge will come and he'll turn around a couple of times, and he knew the piece so well that, and he said, and Wagner says right there, he needs that this needs to happen, and it was exactly his concept in a half hour. We staged the entire thing in 10 days. And then he said, now we have 3 weeks to decide whether we do this or do this. And there's something always to be said for having true masters, whether they're the singers, the conductors, the directors, that there's always something very special about that, having that magic and understanding of Wagner's works, and if that took years of experience, because he was in his 70s when he directed that piece, it makes such a difference. And for me, I am still learning so much about. I've been singing Wagner now for I suppose nearly 20 years.
Oh.
Starting with Froh and starting with the small parts. And I'm still learning and still trying to figure out the way of being more masterful. And Wagner gave us so much material, allowed us for us to always be working towards finding new aspects of his work and how it applies to the world and our art.
Never-ending process.
Exactly.
Corby, thank you very much.
Thank you so much
for this interview. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.